You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Thanks for joining us again for early check-in at Hotel Pacifico and our special election coverage. It's good to see you, Geoff and Mike, bright and early.
Good morning, Kate. This is beginning
Good
to
morning.
be routine.
Look at you two. You're trying to out-chipper each other. I think Mike's defensive because he knows Geoff is the natural morning person in this lineup.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, I had it drummed into me.
Yeah.
Well, it's awesome. I mean, I'm tired, but also really enjoying checking in every morning to talk about what's going on. So let's get into it. As usual, just to remind folks, we'll be coming up back later to our updated bar, our Espresso bar for us morning podcast hosts. But let's do our check-in too on where the leaders are today. So we've got Sonia Furstenau in Victoria to make a carbon tax announcement. John Rustad hosting a meet and greet. And then kicking a campaign kickoff at the Prince George Conservative HQ. And then Premier David Eby is in Surrey. We got to do a shout out to a longtime listener, don't we, Mike?
We do.
Oh, yes, our longtime listener, SW, who sent us in a video of, you're going to have to pronounce it, but the Green Party candidate's last name in West Vancouver.
Ballarat. Yes.
Is that it? Because
Jeremy
we
Ballarat.
We were actually sent a video to show us how to pronounce it, and be kind of embarrassing if we blew it now.
I'm pretty confident. I listened to it a bunch of times. I've taken enough flack about pronunciation that when that gets sent, I take it pretty seriously.
Where have we landed on the serpentine situation?
It's serpentine.
Are we going with that? Do we trust Richard on that?
Well, Brenda Locke via Richard, is that our original source?
So he says.
So he says. Oh, Richard.
But
Mike's trust in you only extends so far.
Richard looked like he was on some kind of, frenetic speed trip last night while he was doing the TV screen on Global News last night. And it was quite something. It was like the John King of British Columbia out there.
Oh man, you can tell he's thriving on the energy of the campaign. Yeah. And he's probably having triple espressos. Yeah.
So on the leaders though, I think Rustad's actually in Vanderhoof today, which is his riding. Thinking did he not pack enough socks for the campaign? Why? I was just surprised he's touching base on the riding so early in the campaign. It should be a safe seat. I don't know. I mean, maybe
he's spending a lot of time out of town. I mean, he is in town, but he's spending tons of time out of town, which is of course he wants to keep the base fired up.
Yeah.
And David Eby back in Surrey, I know not for what purpose, but that's clearly a huge battleground for the NDP.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, as we do these sort of bingo sheets of where is everybody today, Surrey is by far, what's the word? The mode, one we're going to hear soon. And I think that's going to continue. Not a surprise. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a check-in and talk a little bit about the day we had yesterday, which I just want to set up as such a contrast to Monday. Monday, I think we had these kind of big bombs, big blows. And this was a bit more of a back and forth lock horn scenario, I'm going to say. Some people trying to punch through with things and getting kind of locked in debates about budgets and healthcare funding. Let's start then maybe with John Rustad, who, didn't really have a follow-up on the Rustad rebate. And I guess was, talking about economic opportunities, some mining promises, some senior stuff, kind of had a lot out there. But I guess really spent a lot of the day anyway, answering questions about that video about vaccines. How do you think that day was for him, Mike?
My caution here, backseat driver here, my caution to the Conservatives would be you made a big policy announcement the day before on the Rustad rebate. And it takes a while for these things to sink in. There has to be, you have to hammer it, and they didn't talk about it yesterday. And so don't think, I'm not saying they are thinking this, and maybe they are, they're not, but don't think that one day is going to get the job done.
Maybe he's as confused about his announcement on housing as everybody else is. I can't find anybody who can spell it out. It's
Oh,
very
Geoff.
unclear how you would apply for it, who would get it, all that kind of stuff. I mean, really,
Geoff, you're obviously very eager to get this rebate.
no, I'm not eligible,
Geoff
man.
is lining up at the office to get
I'm
it.
one of that mob of seniors who refuses to transfer intergenerational wealth to the young people.
That's another good point.
Wealth hoarders. Yeah.
But anyways, if you got a centerpiece policy, then I would have thought you would go and meet with people who would benefit from the rebate, and like, let's meet with Sally and Jim at their kitchen table in Burnaby, or let's meet with, blah, 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 right? Let's go to Maple Ridge and discuss how they'll benefit from the Rest-Ed rebate. But they're off talking about mining in the Kootenays. So to me, it was like ho-hum, right? Early days, da, da, da,
Yeah. And maybe they kind of knew, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure they were well, maybe I'm going to take that back. I was going to say, I'm sure they were anticipating getting a lot of questions about the vaccine video. And I don't know if
well, they didn't anticipate,
like.
Kate, they did not anticipate getting questions about the vaccine video in the first place.
Yeah.
And this was day 2 where the clip I saw, I didn't have time to watch all of the news, was Rustad talking about how he had 3 shots, but after the third one, he had a heart issue, which I'm very sorry to hear, and then attributes it somehow to the vaccine. So there was no conservative message for day 2 as a result of that. As you said, there was kind of a bunch of clashing and banging, but I think both campaigns had pretty much a day like the previous day at a lesser scale. Eby was in Terrace, where he's talking about a hospital that has been long awaited. And I thought it was interesting that he was accompanied by 2 elected officials who would not normally, the mayor of Terrace and the mayor of the district of Vanderhoof, which may even be in Rustad's riding, I don't know. But, normally an elected official would not stand next to a premier in the middle of an election campaign to say, I'm glad this hospital is finally here. But that's what they did. It's been long awaited. It's a bone of contention in Terrace, and that riding has been held by Ellis Ross. And I think with Ellis Ross as the MLA, it was a safe seat for whoever he ran for. He's now running as the federal candidate in the Conservative camp, and I'm not even sure who's running in his place. But it is a more competitive.
The past federal Conservative candidate is running.
Yeah, okay.
For the BC
Conservatives. But that's an area the NDP used to count on and hope for back in the days when we had a more reliable, resource community base. And it's been the recipient of a lot of this LNG investment and the hospital. But the mayor that I heard, I think it was, I can't remember his name, so I won't try to pronounce it, but from Terrace, cautioned the premier that they're still very concerned in Terrace about homelessness and addiction and those issues, which I think have been put into higher contrast by the tremendous development that's going on up there.
Well, you're right, as you often are, Geoff, except when I point out when you're wrong.
Often.
The NDP held that seat from 2005. Post the apocalypse in 2001, the NDP held the seat for 12 years, and Ellis won last 2 times. So, yeah, naturally, it would be a seat up for grabs. Now, I've kind of had that one in the Conservative win column myself, just because for a number of reasons. Notwithstanding Ellis's departure, but Rustad being a northerner, Eby's not Horgan. And, I think there's a lot of support for LNG and industrial development up there where the Conservatives will have a very clear position on it. And the NDP position I would have to describe as nuanced. So
that'll come as a shock to our supporters.
Yes. So there's still a lot up in the air up there for future development. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the NDP. I mean, I'm sure they're going to make a strong push, and I'm sure Conservatives will have to defend it. But
Kate, can I turn the light briefly to the Green Party?
Yes, that's
what their day was yesterday, because it was an interesting press conference held, I believe, I'm sure it was in Victoria, by Sonia Forceneau on drug policy. And she was flanked by Leslie McBain, who's head of Moms Stop the Harm, people who've lost family members to overdose, often children, and adult children or younger, and Lisa Lapointe, the recently retired coroner. And I give credit to the Greens because they stuck very close to the recommendations that were made by Bonnie Henry and supported by Lisa Lapointe. So they're well thought through and carefully argued, but controversial. Including consideration of non-prescribed safer supply. But that's not the policy that the Greens advanced. What they said was actually pretty close to what the NDP policy has been on this front. And so there's a strong marker down there on that side, which I thought was interesting. And it's interesting to hear Lisa Lapointe out so soon after her long tenure as coroner, endorsing the Greens straight up.
So can you help me, Geoff? Because I was trying to understand like where the biggest differences are between what the Greens announced yesterday and where the NDP are now. It's not obvious to
Well,
me.
what Evie said, and so did Jennifer Whiteside, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, that the government would simply not consider the idea of non-prescribed safe supply. This is turned out to be the bright line. So even in Alberta, in our interview with Marshall Smith made that clear. There are prescribed alternatives available to people in Alberta treatment programs like buprenorphine, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, and so on. And that is okay in the eyes of the Greens and in the NDP. It's not clear it's okay with the Conservatives. It's pretty clear they don't want harm reduction. So on the one side, you have the Conservatives saying harm reduction has gone way too far. It's a problem. We're going to shut down overdose prevention sites. You have the NDP saying we're going to
maintain drug dens. I think they're calling them drug dens. Yeah,
that's right. And the NDP saying we're staying the course, but there will be medical supervision in every case. We're not considering anything else. And the Greens saying we'll do all of the things the NDP is doing, and we will consider some kind of non-prescribed alternative. That's my take anyway.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
I think a key difference, though, is that Lisa Lapointe was standing at a press conference with Sonia Furstenau,
Sure.
and at a previous press conference, the NDP got in their big black Cadillac, drove right through the door, ran her over, backed up, ran over her again, then ran over her again. So I would say that's a key point between the NDP and the Greens.
Okay.
In fact, Lisa Lapointe's kind of relationship with the NDP was literally on the morgue table, the slab, after, a few of these announcements. So the NDP don't want to go near these issues for fear of alienating mainstream voters, which is why we saw the involuntary care announcement right before the election. And they're scared of the issue because top of global news last night, we're conflating some issues here with drugs, addiction, mental health, everything. But SOS, our friend Jess Ketchum was on the top of the news with a poll from Mario Conseco saying how concerned people are about these issues. So, notwithstanding,
can we summarize that poll for a bit? Because I think
I'd
that
like
was
to spend some time on that. It's very interesting.
it was really interesting. Okay,
I'll summarize it. Crime equals bad.
Oh God.
People equal concerned.
Okay, how about this, Mike? How about broadly, going a bit deeper? We're up into the 80s broadly.
You don't want me to be deep, but
okay, can I summarize what I think is important about that poll, because it does show really strong. It does show like strong support for kind of throwing everything at this issue, and then when you get down into the stuff like safe supply and harm reduction strategies, safe supply has 63% support, which is higher than I think you would think based on the discussions we've been having recently, and 53% for harm reduction strategies, right? So the majority in favor of this. I mean, I have some instincts on why the politics of this are messier, but anyway, I feel like it's worth sort of pulling out those data because that's what stood out for me from the SOS.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really good point, Kate.
But I would say, though, that it was a gift to the Conservatives yesterday to have that issue at the top of the news being driven. Now, it's nonpartisan group, but you're talking about the head of London Drugs getting in front of the 6 o'clock news and expressing his concerns with this coalition they've got. That's the issue that helps Conservatives. They've got a good gap on that issue over the NDP as to who's best to deal with these issues. And you got Sonia coming from the other end. The NDP are in a bit of a squeeze on the issue because I'm assuming there's some on the left who are purists on the issue for valid reasons. And, if you want a pure, unadulterated, safe supply position, the Greens are giving you that. So
I think, Kate, you point out something very interesting, because when you get into the harm reduction side of it, and this is not to detract from anything that Mike has just said, there's broader public support for harm reduction measures, including even more prescribed supply. That's a bit contradictory the way the questions were put, but it's a very reputable firm that did it. And it shows how successful conservative forces have been in shaping the debate, because the one harm reduction measure that's in the tank is decriminalization.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's support for the closing of all overdose prevention sites when I look at that. And I think there's room there for the NDP to develop some of the innate support in the public. But right now, the public's at the tail end of a long, really intense discussion about street disorder, crime, both low level and more violent. And I agree this was helpful to the Conservatives, but if you look deeper into Mario Consequo's poll, you see that the cross currents are not nearly as hostile to harm reduction as you would think. And the main reason that people think that there's trouble in the streets this way with folks with substance use disorders is poverty.
Well, I
So
think
there's a
people
strong
want
progressive tone to it.
people want action, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
on
totally.
a whole bunch of different fronts. And Linda Annis from Crime Stoppers made a good point on the news where she said people aren't reporting crime. And, sometimes you will see politicians or police saying crime is down. Really, it's not a big problem, folks. And that's not what the eye test is telling people.
Yeah. And
The
the
eye
poll,
test is different.
yeah. And this poll is showing too, like, I can't remember what the numbers were, but again, it was like, it was the majority saying it's up, right?
Yeah.
My experience is it's up. And then the majority saying it's not getting
Yeah.
reported, right? Like,
Yeah.
But I think this is where, I mean, it was interesting to see these data and the support for harm reduction. I do think what happens and what we're seeing is it gets a little more complicated when people are talking about safe consumption sites that are near their homes or near some part of their lives. And I think that can become very activating for folks who see it as harmful to their local community, whereas broadly, I think people understand it as helpful in the big picture. There can be some local politics that complicate, I think, some of the broad support we're seeing.
Okay.
Can we switch to healthcare? Because I just want to, like, the other one that that's the other one that I think there was some back and forth on, and it didn't punch through in the same way. I agree with you, Mike. Like, this is, and global news. Like, this is what led the day, was the community safety piece. But on healthcare, we had a bit of a back and forth, and I'm going to summarize it as, EB trying to show, like, I'm the one who's going to get behind this, take action, and move improving access to healthcare. And I think John Rustad maybe saying something more like, I'm going to find the efficiencies in a bloated admin budget that is going to actually make this system.
Well, he's saying
free
more
up
than
money.
that too. He's
Okay.
also saying he wants to look at other models and in other European countries, for instance, that have private delivery within a public system.
Okay, so more than that being, he's going to do research.
Yeah, I suppose, but I mean, I think there's always been this aversion to entertaining private delivery in the public healthcare system,
Okay.
and
Okay.
certainly from the NDP, and even the BC Liberals were not terribly excited about it back in the day. They tangled with Brian Day as well. So I would expect the Conservatives will have more to say on that in this campaign. I think the public's ready for some more boldness on this because, what's the alternative? It's if it fits within the Canada Health Act, or even if it doesn't, frankly, I think there's time for a more robust conversation on, like, how are we going to deal with this, right? Because healthcare is eating government in terms of the costs, and the results are spotty, to say the least.
Well, I think the
Geoff,
biggest
yeah.
challenge too is if you wanted to really take a conservative run at it, you could say there's a lot of gatekeepers here, which is true. That of course, the worries about too much unionization, the controversy in the rest of Canada about travel nurses who are being paid many times what the local workforce is being paid to fill in gaps. There's a whole set of problems, but I think the Conservatives want to keep this as simple as possible and just say it's chaos and you can't get into the emergency room, and not really spend a lot of time. If you look at their platform, they really go out of their way to not say private delivery in any way, shape, or form. It's non-government alternatives is what they call it, I think, which is, just as soon as they fire Bonnie Henry, we'll get to the non-government alternatives while we're checking the textbooks.
If I were Bonnie Henry, I'd just watch out for that big black Cadillac. That's all I'd say.
Guess I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest you may have a friend or family member who recently got their real estate license, as Vancouver, any part of Vancouver, remains Canada's leading source of multi-million-dollar teardowns. And sure, Toronto's rental vacancy rates are low, but guess whose are lower? In the latest 2021 census, over 100,000 residents claimed they were spending over 50% of their income on rent and utilities. As the presenting sponsor and hometown team for British Columbians, TELUS is stepping up to become a part of the solution by launching TELUS Living, an initiative to build purpose-built rentals in communities across BC. As BC's largest private employer and an essential services provider, TELUS recognizes the importance of being able to hire and retain workers who live and work locally. With that in mind, TELUS Living aims to create purpose-built housing options that offer a pure fiber-connected smart living experience that working middle-class people can afford. These housing options are designed to fit the unique needs of each community, providing a mix of unit sizes and amenities that cater to diverse population groups such as students, essential workers, and young professionals. And these units will be located in highly desirable areas because they will be built on the site of TELUS's central offices, buildings that provide the power necessary to deliver an internet or phone connection over copper wiring. You probably have one in your own community. Because of TELUS's leadership in fiber deployment, the central offices are no longer required because fiber uses much less power than copper. This means that the land can be repurposed to help with the housing affordability crisis in the communities where TELUS customers live and work. The copper can be repurposed too, but we'll tell you about that, as well as where this housing is being built next week. All right, I got to move us along. And we're going again to this brand new fantastic segment, Milking the Data, brought to you by BC Dairy. Farmers need guaranteed access to water to feed BC. Mike, what do you have for us today? What are we milking?
Well, we're going to milk just as we get ready for some new polling to drop in the days ahead. I want to talk about, set it up in terms of the regions and just to bring everyone's base of understanding up in terms of what actually happened last time. And in BC, we have three principal regions we look at in polling: the island, the interior, and the lower mainland, okay? So let's just look at the island and the interior. Basically, they cancel each other off. The NDP are very strong on the island. Historically, BC Liberals are very strong in the interior. If you go back to the last election, the island, 51% voted NDP last time, real high watermark there. Oregon being from the island, BC Liberals having a very poor offering for the island. The Greens doing quite well last time too, and they're a very island-based party. They were 28%, and the BC Liberals were at 21%. So voila, no BC Liberal seats on the island. Surprise, surprise.
Does that mirror reflection maintain when the polls are closer?
Well, if the polls were closer, the NDP would still win the island, but not as much.
Right. So
but
go ahead.
Well, if you go to the interior, BC Liberals actually won the interior last election despite being hammered in the election, and they won 45%, the NDP had 37%. And that's why they came out of the interior with about 18 out of 24 seats. And that's why they're kind of fenced off in the interior and didn't have much going on anywhere else. My cat is very uncomfortable with this conversation. So we get to the main arena, and that's the lower mainland. And the BC Liberals throughout their time in government used to win the lower mainland popular vote, and they would win most of the seats in lower mainland by extension of that. Last time, it was an NDP smoke show. It was 51% NDP, 34% BC Liberal, and the Greens 12% weren't really in the conversation except for West Van Sea to Sky. So, surprise, surprise, the lower mainland is where the action is, and we'll see the leaders there a lot. Now, most of the public polls have shown over the last few months that the Conservatives are actually pretty close in lower mainland. Like it's single digits. So if it goes from 17-point gap between the two contending parties to something like 5 points, then as we talked about the other day, ridings are going to fall. And the first place they're going to fall is places like the Fraser Valley, right? So that's what I'll be looking for in the polling. I'm not going to be looking just at the top line, the polls. It's how are they doing in each of these regions, because each region's got a very different story. And
microclimates.
Is
a person I know once called them microclimates. I quite like it.
Yes.
Yeah.
The irony on the interior is that the Conservatives should be absolutely killing it in the interior, given how they overlay with the federal vote. The BC Liberals did very well in the interior. And so where did the complaints about the BC Liberal name come from? Conservatives from the interior, when they were winning it. So the Conservatives better do better than the BC Liberals in the interior, or else I want my money back on the rebrand.
That's a whole episode. Like if that comes to pass, we'll do a whole episode. Mike McDonald wants his
I'm still
money back
undecided on the
on the
rebrand. I'm not
rebrand.
sure if it's going to work yet or not. So
Okay.
anyway, so that's your regional cheat sheet. Thanks to our friends with the cows.
Interesting.
And wouldn't you say,
Yeah.
Mike, that in Surrey, which is another bylaw, the tide can come in and go out really, really quickly. I've heard that from a lot of people who work out in Surrey. Like you can, in a week or so, the whole mood can shift, and suddenly, where you were doing okay, you're underwater.
Yeah, well, especially in ridings with fairly strong non-Caucasian populations, it's hard to see what's really going on from a outside perspective. Like I'm not listening to Red FM because I don't speak Punjabi, but if I was listening to it, I might have a different take. Same with I'm not listening to Chinese. I'm not on WeChat. I'm not listening to Fairchild. I'm not exactly sure what's going on in Richmond or parts of Burnaby in the Chinese community. So there are, I think 20% of the Lower Mainland's Chinese. That's a pretty significant voter base.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be helpful. Especially as we get deeper into this election, like I'd actually be curious, the way, especially like the way, Mike, you've been watching global news just to see what leads it, in some of the kind of Punjabi news channels. Yeah, I'd be curious to see, because I don't think it's a safe assumption that it directly translates. And a bit of that who's winning the day, I think I'm going to poke around and see what we can do to procure some of those more insights. Because it's microclimates, it's political microclimates, and it's going to come down to some critical climates in Surrey. All right. Sorry, this is the tightest 30 minutes every morning. Oh my gosh. We're going to move now to the topic of the day. Our topic is ads. I'm going to start with one that came out from the BC Conservatives, actually, with Kim Rustad talking about her husband, really personal, and talking about their marriage and how she discovered she could not have children, and he stood by her. And just basically, I think a really heartfelt portrait of a long marriage. I'm wondering what your impressions are, Geoff.
Well, I'm wondering what your impressions are, Kate.
Yeah, no, so I have to say, like, I saw it immediately and thought this feels like a play for probably just about my demographic, middle-aged to like older women. I think she's very relatable. I think her story is touching. I think there's people who are going to be pretty deaf to that, but I think the imperative for John Rustad's team is to make him a bit more warm and personable. I think the danger in his personal brand is that he veers into sort of just weirdo and kind of crackpot, right? And then the more he can just look like, your kind of safe, lovable, weird, maybe slightly weird uncle. I think that works. And I think that was with a bird, but like I think that was a pretty, and there's some nice shots of Bjarty's in there, but I think it was quite good. I think it was quite good. Yeah, thoughts from you from the
I thought it had
members?
a lot of echoes of Pierre Poilievre's summer campaign to soften his image with a very attractive piece where he was putting a jigsaw puzzle together or something with his child, and he's been contradicting it ever since by name calling Jagmeet Singh in extremely nasty ways and just being as tough as he possibly can. But I agree with it. It was a perfectly good ad, but I think it's one that's going to just disappear in the blizzard of campaign rhetoric.
Yeah, we'll see how much muscle they put behind the ad. In past campaigns, I know from the BC Liberal side, efforts were made to reposition Gordon Campbell and Christy Clark in more long-form advertising like infomercials, and they tended to work because they were telling a story. That was back in the day when everyone was watching the 6 o'clock news and might stick around for the 7 o'clock infomercial. But it's important to give a glimpse of what people are really like, or at least what you want them to see. And I thought, John Horgan's advertising was very good in that respect as well. So, I think it's a good idea for the Conservatives to fill in the blanks on John Rustad.
I have to say, it was a good one. I mean, it's very polished, and it's because I think around the same time I was watching this yesterday, I was watching another one by Tim Waltz, and it's him like working on his car, and I just have to say,
brilliant. Yeah,
it's brilliant, right? And I think, just to put it out there, I think one of the keys is, especially on social media, you're balancing, like, social media lands and has legs, the way more the degree to which it feels kind of authentic and organic, right? The more polished stuff just gains a little less traction. And the genius of the Tim Waltz thing is it's kind of like, it's a well-polished version of a dude fixing his car. Like it's got a little bit of more of that element. And I think, if you're working to build any of the leaders brands right now, like bringing in a bit more of that is going to really help you for legs on socials. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I want to talk to you today about public safety and how our sponsor, FortisBC, works to keep communities safe during wildfire season. Some of the steps they take include application of fire suppression materials and fire blankets around infrastructure, clearing vegetation, and monitoring assets to maintain service for customers in the event sections of the FortisBC energy system are damaged. The employees of FortisBC live and work in the communities that they serve, so they too understand how wildfires impact families, homes, and businesses. Many FortisBC staff involved in the 2023 West Kelowna wildfire response were personally affected, whether they were on an evacuation alert themselves or helping friends and family evacuate safely. As an energy provider, FortisBC is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to responding to wildfires. Coordinating with emergency officials, BC Wildfire Services, and other local agencies is critical to maintaining the safe and reliable energy British Columbians rely on. On behalf of our sponsor, FortisBC, thank you to all of the crews, firefighters, emergency responders, and community members who work tirelessly to keep our communities safe during a busy wildfire season. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Moving along. Gosh, I feel like I've had too many espressos because this episode is moving so fast. But let's go to the espresso bar. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to give two shots to doing something in terrace around hospitals and healthcare where it's very visible. I think it's important.
Is that a positive shot or a negative shot?
Well, we should only get to do shots with coffee, so
Is it decaf or calf?
So it's a shot.
It's
okay.
You're calling it decaf. The strategy is.
I think it's a good thing that EB is standing in front of a hospital that's just about to have the ribbon cut, rather than issuing a document about healthcare or backcasting to much accomplished, more to do. It's tangible and right in front of people, and I think is a good solid answer to people who are wondering what's been happening on healthcare.
Yeah. It is a caffeinated campaign strategy. Yeah. Mike, calf or decaf?
Well, let's continue. I think similar as yesterday is the Conservatives need to get a little jolt of caffeine in the system, and I'm expecting them to pick up the pace a bit in terms of putting Rustad into the battleground of votes in the Lower Mainland and showing the connection between their agenda and people. And so far, I haven't seen that with the images so much. There's been some good ones, but it's a bit uneven so far. So I don't feel this campaign has really got off to a roaring start yet. And I think on the Conservative end, they're the ones under pressure to build the momentum and overtake the NDP. So the onus is on them to pick up the pace.
Solid. Okay. I'm also going to name a decaf strategy. I'm going to say I've seen a little bit on, mostly on X, about candidates not participating in all candidates meetings. The ones that were named were Conservatives, but I'll put it out there to anyone who doesn't do this. If your local Chamber of Commerce is trying to host an all candidates debate, like you're not winning much by not participating. And especially in some of these smaller ridings, like I don't know how you make the case that it's not a friendly, and you got to, I put it this way too. You're running to represent everyone in the riding. So playing some kind of card of like, oh, they're too unfriendly or they're too harsh. Like you're not Donald Trump. It's not going to work. Don't do it.
So you're saying the Conservatives should go to all the public sector union debates?
No. There are places that are less friendly, but like I'm
always appreciated those invitations from the BCTF in the previous elections.
The ones I heard are Conservatives not going to Chamber of Commerce ones. And I'd say, yeah.
Because they're not in the pocket of business.
Yeah. There you go.
All right.
There you go. All right. That is another episode. Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of our daily election podcast. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, FortisBC and BC Dairy. We will see you tomorrow, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.